Listen, I'm no prude, but how do we go from this to this? Confession, I haven't actually seen the new adaptation of Wuthering Heights yet because I live abroad and the closest movie theater is about 2 hours away from me. So I have to wait for it to go onto streaming, but I'm a big fan of Wuthering Heights and I have a lot of strong opinions, so I really wanted to be a part of this conversation. So today we are briefly going to discuss a little bit of the controversy around the new movie and talk about another Wuthering Heights adaptation that I think did a fantastic job of staying true to the source material. Let's talk controversy. Number one, Margot Robbie is blonde and too old to play a teenager. She is absolutely stunning, but she's in her late 30s, so nowhere near convincing as a 19-year-old. Number two, Jacob Elordi is too white to play a Romani character. Is the movie Victorian, Georgian, British, German? Whatever this is. When it comes to costuming, I'm okay with a little bit of creative licensing if it's done intentionally and coherently. I'll admit that some of the ensembles are a certifiable look, but this is just bad. And don't even get me started on yet another depiction of corsets being tight-laced on bare skin. I am a historical fashion nerd, so if you know, you know. This just wasn't a thing. But the main issue that most fans of the book seem to have, based on the trailer at least, is that it seems to be glamorizing or romanticizing instead of treating it like the tragedy that it is. Now, while I am generally most always a stay true to the source material kind of girl, but art is ever evolving and the quotation marks do suggest that it is going to be very loosely based on the original. I'm trying to stay open-minded and I will end up watching it as soon as it's available. However, Emerald Fennell tends to lean more towards spectacle over substance. Shocking, interesting, visually stunning, but we have to ask, are her films critiquing this shocking behavior or enjoying it? Her characters often feel more like symbolic caricatures than three-dimensional people, which is concerning when it comes to characters as complex as Cathy and Heathcliff. Even the movie poster looks like a 1970s or 80s bodice ripper paperback romance, which while I love the aesthetic, again, this is not a romance. I do have to say that the press tour looks absolutely slayed though. But let's move on to a different Wuthering Heights adaptation. One that is probably the closest thing we have so far to the original story. The 2009 ITV miniseries starring Tom Hardy and Charlotte Riley is broken up into 2 one-hour episodes and is an overwhelming fan favorite. Now, it still has the same issue that the modern movie has in casting a white actor for Heathcliff, and we're gonna get into why that matters in a minute. But the reason this adaptation is number one in my opinion, it takes the time to do the story justice, including the second generation plotline with Cathy Jr., Linton Heathcliff, and Hareton Earnshaw. It's deeply emotional, character-focused, and moody, and lets Cathy be feral, contradictory, and brilliant. Tom Hardy's Heathcliff is intense without being cartoonishly cruel. Fans often say that this adaptation finally understood that this is a tragedy shaped by environment, not a romance about bad decisions. So let's talk about the historical context of the original and why this adaptation is so successful at conveying the emotional realness of the story. There are major spoilers ahead, so be warned. Also, for the sake of keeping this video a reasonable length, we're going to stick to analyzing the first generation of the Earnshaw, Linton, Heathcliff families. You know, the older I get, the more I appreciate just how subversive these women were just for being authors in the first place. Not only did they break into a male-dominated industry, but they also wrote about class, gender, race, and how women navigated a deeply repressive patriarchal society. In particular, I'd like to compare Emily Brontë to one of her biggest contemporaries, Jane Austen. Jane Austen lived a comparatively stable, socially integrated life within the English gentry, observing courtship, class, and gender constraints from the inside. Her sharp wit and controlled irony came from a writer who understood the rules of society and knew exactly how to expose them. Emily Brontë, by contrast, lived a far more isolated and inward life on the Yorkshire moors, shaped by loss, solitude, and emotional intensity, which gave Wuthering Heights its raw elemental power and refusal to moralize. Where Austen dissects society with precision, Brontë writes from within the storm itself, less interested in manners than in what happens when social structures crush the human spirit. Austen's writing was more focused on manners, etiquette, marriage markets, the dance of propriety, and clever women navigating a rigid system with grace and intelligence. Her critique of class is sharp, but delivered through irony, comedy, romantic satisfaction, and the idea that goodness, wit, and character can triumph within the system. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, on the other hand, is straight up hostile towards the genteel world. Instead of society is a dance, you get society is a prison. Instead of drawing rooms and embroidery, you get moors, storms, dogs, dirt, and emotional violence. Instead of believing good behavior will earn you respect, Bronte's world says, no, the wealthy are all hypocrites and cruelty hides behind manners. It's not just disdain for wealth, it's revulsion. Emily Brontë looks at Austen's polite society and basically says, these people are rotten, their rules are cages, their civility is a lie. Burn it all down. Brontë is basically the anti-Austen. A dark mirror held up to the same society, but with utter contempt instead of wit. In a way, this actually meshes well with Emerald Fennell's approach. She unflinchingly shines a light on the oppressive cruelty ever present in our world. Both Promising Young Woman and Saltburn look at humanity, and especially those in power, with raw disdain. But her work also likes to shock and excite you with its depravity, so that you feel slightly ashamed of yourself for being so titillated. It's a subtle difference, but Bronte's vibe is cautionary tragedy. Fennell's is usually tragedy tinged by depraved fantasy. Cathy and Heathcliff are both members of oppressed and marginalized groups, and they recognize that outsider status in each other. They cling together in a very codependent us versus them mentality. Let's talk about why. Cathy struggles because she has the misfortune of being a difficult woman.
I think I can hear them arriving.
Try not to run.
Gosh, darling. She's a spirited girl, and it would be a shame to tame her completely.
Some women fit into the cultural mold with ease and grace, and others rail against the system and the unfair expectations placed on them. Side note, I wonder how many of these difficult women are actually just autistic with a strong sense of social justice and a disdain for hierarchies and unfair systems.
Who said that? Hello?
In Bronte's time, and many of these are unfortunately still relevant today, a woman's value was tied to marriageability, not individuality. Beauty, charm, modesty, and obedience were a social currency. Emotional restraint was mandatory. Passion, anger, or ambition were labeled as unfeminine, unstable, or dangerous. Reputation was everything. Public visibility was tightly controlled. Accomplishments were ornamental, not empowering, and married women had no separate legal identity. Look up coverture and when it ended if you feel like getting pissed off. Inheritance overwhelmingly favored men, and financial dependence was built in, and leaving a marriage was nearly impossible. Marriage was an economic necessity, not a romantic choice. Remaining unmarried risked financial insecurity, social marginalization, and lifelong dependence on your male relatives, which was obviously not a good option for Cathy. Good marriages prioritized stability over love and affection. When it came to sexual double standards, female sexuality was heavily policed. Desire was framed as moral failure, illness, or hysteria, while men's behavior was excused and women paid the cost. The psychological impact of all of this, which is very key for Cathy, is that women were trained to suppress their authentic selves. Internal conflict was normalized, and good behavior often meant self-erasure. But Cathy is nature. She's the wild wind on the moors. She's untamable, half feral, and emotionally bigger than the rules around her. Her wardrobe and hair reflect this. Loose curls and flyaways, frayed edges, rumpled lived-in dresses, earth tones and natural textiles. If Cathy had been born in a different time, she might have had a chance at happiness. Her free spirit isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's a refusal to fit herself into a little box of acceptability. The tragedy is that the world demands she does exactly that. By the way, if you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if we haven't met yet, my name is Megan. I have a bachelor's degree in English, History, and Cultural Studies, and I love to do deep dives on this kind of media. So stick around if that sounds like your cup of tea. You know what to do. See if one of those makes it in. Now, I mentioned earlier that the race of the actor playing Heathcliff matters, and that's because it is a huge part of why he is the way that he is. The world treats him unkindly. Yes, because he's a lower class, but also because he's not white. Mr. Earnshaw finds Heathcliff starving and homeless in Liverpool, a major port city tied to empire, colonial trade, migration, and displacement. Some of the key textual descriptions are dark-skinned, almost as dark as if it came from the devil, a little lascar, and repeatedly called this word, which is a slur. While his parentage or ethnicity is never officially confirmed, he is most certainly not white and is likely of Indian or Middle Eastern descent. Both Lascars and Romani, or really anyone dark-skinned, were exploited and looked down upon as lesser, assumed to be untrustworthy. It's worth noting that to this day, modern Romani still face racism, discrimination, and social exclusion. But this was the height of the British Empire, and the English viewed themselves as culturally and morally superior to the nations they conquered and occupied. As a darker-skinned person, Heathcliff is talked down to, abused, and deliberately kept powerless. Mr. Earnshaw cares for Heathcliff while he's alive, but everyone else in society spurns him and expects the worst from him. Labeling theory is a sociological idea that says that people often become what society repeatedly calls them, especially when the label is imposed by those with power. Once labeled, people are treated differently. Over time, they may internalize the label and act in ways that confirm it. It shapes their lens of how the world works and what to expect from other people. Heathcliff is someone the world brutalized into darkness, not someone born monstrous. Early on in the 2009 adaptation, I found Cathy and Heathcliff to be way more sympathetic than I thought they would be. They're both victims of the system who are trying their best to rail against the unfairness of their situation. Their rage feels justified. In the first act, Heathcliff is the only character who treats Cathy as an equal, accepts her wildness, shares her rejection of social norms, and doesn't ask her to be smaller, quieter, gentler, or proper. Of course she gravitates towards him. Of course he's sympathetic at this stage in the story. He is the only person in that world who sees and honors her full self, not the version that men want to manufacture. And Heathcliff is treated as less than human by the gentleman, whose entire moral brand is built on civility and refinement. Cathy is the only one who sees that hypocrisy and sides with him. They both see the other for who they are, and they love and accept each other, jagged edges and all. Their bond is the only thing giving them oxygen in a cruel world. If this were Austen, they likely would have found a way to rise above their circumstances and find their happy ending. But this is Brontë. If the estate of Wuthering Heights is chaos, exposure, and emotional truth, Thrushcross Grange is its polar opposite. Even the design of these two houses tells a story. Wuthering Heights is raw, storm-beaten, and inhospitable. It doesn't care about comfort, only survival. Thrushcross Grange, on the other hand, is light, order, and containment. Soft carpets, polite voices, carefully controlled emotions. A place where nothing sharp is meant to show. In another world or another novel, Edgar Linton might have been a Jane Austen hero. He's gentle, considerate, He listens. He doesn't raise his voice or his hand. After the violence, volatility, and emotional neglect of her childhood, Edgar offers Cathy something that Heathcliff never can: calm, gentleness, validation, predictability, rest. After years of chaos, that doesn't feel shallow to Cathy. It feels like a life raft. Cathy could have loved Heathcliff forever if the world had allowed them to grow naturally, if they had been given safety together, if their love hadn't required constant resistance. But she's exhausted, she's traumatized, and she's tired of fighting everything and everyone just to exist. Edgar offers her a life where she doesn't have to be on guard all the time. And for a while, that feels like enough. But the problem with Thrushcross Grange is the same problem as its gardens, because everything wild has been carefully trimmed away. The Lintons don't rule through cruelty. They rule through politeness. There is a narrow window of acceptable behavior, a specific kind of femininity, softness, and restraint that Cathy is allowed to occupy. At first, her fire is charming to Edgar. Her spirit is indulged as long as it stays decorative. But once Cathy begins to realize that she can't have her cake and eat it too, once her emotional needs spill outside the tidy boundaries, her behavior becomes intolerable. Her volatility stops being romantic, her passion stops being excusable, and her refusal to fully let Heathcliff go becomes a threat to order. And Edgar, for all of his kindness, cannot love what he cannot control. Not because he's cruel, but because he's been shaped by a world that equates love with containment. Thrushcross Grange does not destroy Cathy violently. It erodes her quietly. Where Wuthering Heights breaks people openly, the Lintons prune. And Cathy, who was never meant to be small, begins to suffocate. This is the final irony of her choice. She chose him because she needed peace. But peace, without truth, becomes another kind of cage. The repressions of the Linton is so gentle, it almost convinces you it isn't harm at all. Almost.
I'm as trapped as you are.
Except your cage is more gilded than mine.
That exchange isn't just romantic angst. It's the entire tragedy in miniature. Because Cathy is trapped. She's just not trapped equally. Her and Heathcliff grow up in the same house, endure the same emotional neglect, and suffer under the same violent authority. But the world responds to them very differently. And that difference slowly, inevitably wedges them apart. Because Cathy is a young woman with societal value. She is pretty, she is clever, she is legible to society. Her wildness is scolded, but it's also indulged. People want to civilize her, not discard her. Heathcliff, by contrast, is a racialized, classless outsider. He's beaten, degraded, and treated as disposable. Seemingly, there is no version of adulthood where he's rewarded for growing up or behaving properly. The system has already decided that he doesn't belong. So when Cathy's injured and taken into the Linton household, she doesn't just heal physically, she is absorbed. She experiences softness, kindness, safety, comfort, and respect. And crucially, she learns that life can be easier if you play by the rules. This is where the tragedy really begins, because Cathy doesn't stop loving Heathcliff. But she does begin to internalize the idea that choosing him means choosing hardship. Not just emotionally, but materially, socially, existentially.
There. The pause that betrays you.
I'm frightened.
Of what? Of me? Or poverty?
You're asking me to risk my reputation. Once a woman's reputation is gone, she has nothing.
The old Cathy would never have said such a
The
thing.
old Cathy didn't know the world.
Heathcliff, the smart and jaded man that he is, recognizes this instantly. He knows what Cathy is just starting to sense, that the world will never meet them halfway. Instead of hoping, imagining a future where love might be enough, he retreats into fatalism. Why would she choose him? Why would anything good ever happen? After all, it never does. and that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As Cathy adapts to her new gilded cage, Heathcliff experiences her adaptation as a betrayal, not because she's wrong to want comfort, but because comfort has never been an option for him. This difference poisons their intimacy. Cathy starts to treat Heathcliff as a toy that she can pick up and put down, a place to return to when the drawing rooms suffocate her. And Heathcliff, sensing that imbalance, grows bitter, resentful, and increasingly hostile. Neither of them is wrong for feeling the way that they feel, and neither of them is innocent. Class doesn't just shape their circumstances, it shapes their psychology. Cathy still believes on some level that she can have everything: love, safety, passion, belonging. Heathcliff knows better, or at least he thinks he does. By the time Cathy chooses Edgar, it isn't because she loves Heathcliff less. It's because she understands intuitively that the world will let her survive with Edgar and will destroy her with Heathcliff. And Heathcliff understands that too. That's what makes this story so devastating. It isn't that society forbids their love outright. It simply makes the cost unbearable, and for one of them, more than the other. It makes sense that this adaptation is happening in 2026, an era where romance is one of the biggest selling genres in the publishing world, and dark romance is one of the biggest subgenres. Dark romance is defined by morally gray or outright dangerous love interests, extreme power imbalances, and relationships shaped by obsession, control, and trauma, often framed as intensely erotic rather than cautionary. Its popularity helps explain why modern audiences are drawn to the story of Wuthering Heights. The genre rewards aestheticized intensity, but that's where the disconnect happens. Wuthering Heights isn't interested in selling us desire. It's interested in interrogating it. Brontë wasn't asking us to swoon over Heathcliff and Cathy. She's asking what happens when a rigid society denies people dignity, safety, and belonging, and then punishes them for the damage that causes. Their love isn't aspirational. It's corrosive, forged under oppression, and then left to rot without mercy. When modern adaptations lean into sex appeal and spectacle without that critique, they don't just modernize the story, they fundamentally change its meaning. What was once a warning about power, clash, gender, and dehumanization risks becoming another fantasy about all-consuming intensity at any cost. And that matters because Brontë wasn't romanticizing this world, she was indicting it. Wuthering Heights endures not because it's sexy, but because it's honest, because it refuses to offer comfort, because it shows us that love, when trapped inside violent systems, can become just another form of destruction. And if we lose that, we don't just lose the spirit of the book, we lose the point. Now, I could have been calling this new adaptation completely wrong. I'm basing most of the speculation on the trailer and past Emerald Fennell works. So perhaps I'll make a follow-up video once I've finally seen it. If you have already seen it, do you agree or disagree with my arguments? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye!